Okay, hi. Will you please state your name and your position here, do you?
No problem. I'm Kate Crow. I'm the Curator of Special Collections and Archives here at the University of Denver. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our Broadside collection. So the Broadside is an interesting medium. It tends to be one that works really well for poetry because it's essentially one sheet. That's what it means. Broadsides have been used a lot of different ways over time. They used to be how folks would kind of cheaply and easily produce and distribute materials. In the 20th, 21st century, they tend to be more limited edition, kind of getting into a fine art realm, or at least an art realm. So I have a couple of examples here that I think are really good illustrations of how this particular format is used to express poetry kind of in the world, and how this particular format is different than maybe if you were reading a poem in a printed text. This one is, I didn't actually realize it until I was looking at it. This is a Sandra McPherson poem, but the design of it is this kind of quilt pattern, which I didn't realize until I looked at this, which is called a colophon, which basically tells you kind of who designed it, who made it, who had kind of creative input onto whatever it is that you're looking at. And so one of the artists who created this is Claire Van Vliet, who's a really well known and very well respected book artist, printmaker, but she's using this quilt pattern as a way of creating kind of a visual communication that underpins the poem, which has a lot to do with the handmade, which again the poem itself references that, but having something that is a limited edition, that is made by hand. There's a lot of reference to this throughout kind of books and book arts and fine press, is that the idea of the thing being handmade, of it having a very specific texture, of it having the human hand being evident in it, essentially. So this one is a little bit more, I think, representative of the collection as a whole, which tends to be more kind of beat poets. So this is obviously Allen Ginsberg. There is nothing more kind of, I think, representative of beat poets than that they like to make fun of and mock everything, laugh about, especially at Ginsberg. I mean, it's not like he's not also dark as well, but this I think is a really great example of Ginsberg is Jewish, and so there's references to his Jewish faith throughout the poem, again, like in a very kind of traditionally beat way. And then the broadside itself is kind of, again, it's doing some support work. It's trying to visually communicate the intent of the poem, the intent of that particular artist, and then it can also be seen as kind of a conversation between the text of the poem and the poet and the visual artist who's referencing the poem in to make the actual final work. Like essentially the broadside is like a conversation between the two pieces. Example of how broadsides are, and I think in a lot of ways artist books are, they're trying to get you to think about books and text and poetry in a way that doesn't limit you just to sort of printed words on a page, that tries to bring the poem to some degree to life, that tries to give it some kind of visual substance that helps to communicate the emotional impact and the idea behind the poem itself.
How did the University of Denver acquire this collection of broadsides?
So this particular collection, we purchased the whole thing. It was all compiled by a gentleman named Steve Clay, who is a poet himself. He's also, I think, as most poets do, needed to find another way to make a living. And so he started a press called Granary Press. And then in addition to that, he also sells essentially compilations of things that he's compiled over the years because he's a working poet and because he's really well known in the community. So he, you know, a lot of these folks, if not all of them, he either knew the artist, he knew the poet, he knew both of them. And so he ended up either through purchase or donation, he ended up with this amazing collection, which he then smartly packaged as a cohesive set of largely beat poet focused broadsides, and then pitched them to universities and said, would you like to buy this? And we said yes, so we bought it.
Do you know how many poems there are in total?
So the collection as a whole is about 10 boxes. Each one has about between 30 and 45 broadsides in it, so it's several hundred. It's under 1,000, but several hundred.